Hello, I'm Stu Rich with a new episode of Facilities Management Minutes, a video interview series dedicated to sharing the perspectives of some of our industry's most interesting thought leaders. Our guest today is Nicolas Mangon, the Vice President of AEC Strategy and Marketing for Autodesk. Nicolas developed his love for engineering and design from his father, who was an aeronautical engineer for Airbus in France. Nicolas moved to this country specifically to get a job working for Autodesk, a journey that didn't work out exactly as he planned, but he was eventually successful. For the past 20 years or so, Nicolas has worked with customers around the world as Autodesk continues to evolve its strategy and product offerings related to infrastructure, design, and construction. If you enjoy this content, please tap the like and subscribe buttons to make sure you are notified of new interviews as they become available. And if there's someone you want to hear from in this series, let us know in the comments below or by reaching out to marketing@cartograph.com. Now, on to our conversation with Nicolas. Nicolas, thank you very much for joining our interview series here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time. I think you and Autodesk have such an important voice to lend to this conversation. So thank you for being part of this series.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'd like to start just with a little bit of your personal background. Can you share with our viewers a bit of your personal journey and what brought you to where you are in your life?
Originally, I was born in France, in the south of France, in a city called Toulouse. It's famous for food, for sure, but also that's where Airbus is assembling all of their airplanes. And my father was a contractor, and he actually built, most of the buildings for Airbus back in the day. So during the weekends, when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, I was going to do job inspection on the construction site. So that's where it started. And then later in my teens, I discovered the first computers. They were like Commodores and Aurics and that kind of things. And I'm like, wow, technology is cool. We can really automate and change the world, using, these computers. I moved to Paris and I studied structural engineering, structural and civil engineering, just near Notre Dame. So that was kind of cool to be in the city, but my passion about computer science, remained, and I was always into computers. So when I graduated, in the 90s, I actually had a startup. I was developing software for, finite element analysis and, quantity takeoff, that kind of things. And I got acquired fairly quickly by a larger company at the time. And then worked in France for a while. And what happened in the late 90s, Autodesk actually released AutoCAD 14. It was the first, solution on Windows that was working. But what I saw in AutoCAD was just amazing because it was the first C++ API. It was the first time, Autodesk had that kind of platform. And I got so excited that I think I had a calling. And I told my girlfriend, who is my wife today, I said, we have to move to the US. I have to work for Autodesk. It's my destiny. And that was like so strong that she said, yeah. So we bought a one-way ticket, moved to San Francisco. And then I went and knocked at the door and they said, who's that guy? So of course they did not hire me. I went once and twice and 10 times and 20 times. Nothing happened really. So I worked in the Silicon Valley. I worked for a startup that was building software for bridge engineers. So finite elements, post-tensioning, that kind of things, really on the engineering part. And then 4 years later, 4 years, maybe 5, Autodesk acquired Revit. And I contacted the founders of Revit and they say, yeah, you can join the team and be part of our little adventure. So I was hired by the Revit, founders, that were inside of Autodesk. And my first job was really 2 things. Bring the civil structural side to Revit. That was mainly for architects. So the product I was responsible for was Revit Structure, if some of you remember. The second thing is The structural world is very complex because you need to do fabrication, you need to do analysis. So Revit didn't have an API at the time, so very hard to communicate, data inside and outside of Revit. So my role was really to also build or be responsible for an API in Revit. So that's what I did. And then I grew up inside Autodesk, which is a wonderful company and give a chance to anyone. And I became the lead PM and strategy for Revit and BIM. So I started really from the beginning. And in the last 10 years, I moved into a more global role to look at the entire AEC industry for Autodesk and looking at the strategy, which is amazing because I get to meet a lot of amazing customers. I get to see a lot of incredible projects. I meet a lot of companies that build amazing solutions. So it's best thing in the world.
That's a pretty fascinating journey. I love the story of knocking on the door in San Francisco many, many times.
Yeah, physically knocking at the door, really physically, yes.
So over the years, you have come to have a pretty comprehensive understanding of Autodesk and the solutions that you offer to your customers. How do you see Autodesk driving change in our industry about how we design and construct our buildings and infrastructure?
In terms of technology, we like to think about Autodesk as a disruptor and also a company that can, digitize or digitalize, spaces. And we actually, I think next year will be our 40th anniversary. So we disrupted the market 40 years ago with the introduction of AutoCAD. And it's important to understand that AutoCAD was the democratization of CAD on a PC. The goal was really to give access to everybody this technology. About 20 years ago, that's when I joined Autodesk here in Boston. And that's when we introduced BIM to the market. We introduced the name and really the concepts of parametric modeling at the time. And it was also very disruptive because moving from 2D to 3D and parametric modeling was really a big disruption of the processes and how people worked. The third disruption that we introduced, we started to democratize the cloud. And that's with multiple acquisitions that we've made, multiple solutions like BIM 360 or Autodesk Construction Cloud, which is the new name. So that was a disruption about 5-6 years ago, but with COVID and people working remotely, we believe that it's not disruption anymore. It's the standard, right? So we introduced that technology and it became the norm, just like BIM became the norm as well. Where we see the next disruption happening is with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So that's the next wave of exploration, and that will change the way we all work. So it's gonna reduce some of the tedious tasks. It's gonna automate a bunch of things in the process. It's gonna also enable architects, engineers, and contractors to explore things they were not able to explore because time and resources are limited. But with artificial intelligence, the computer will be able to suggest ideas or predict risks, whether it's on the construction site or in operations or during design. So that's where we are trying to always, change, improve, and democratize, technology for the industry. And McKinsey published this report, several years ago, and they said that the construction industry was one of the least digital industries. It was just better architecture, agriculture, and the fishing and hunting industry, right? So just a little bit better. I think in the last 10 years, we saw a fast acceleration, but there's a long way to go compared to our friends in manufacturing, where the percentage of spent into IT versus their GDP is much higher than what we. So
BIM and CAD represent very important, but certainly not the only data involved in the overall design and construction process. There's so many different players, so many different sources and formats. And how do you see Autodesk Forge playing a role to enable the sharing and management of this information in the context, particularly of design and construction?
Let me explain maybe Forge, a little bit. So if you think about AutoCAD as the first generation platform of development with the ARX technology that I mentioned, that's what got me into this country and company. Revit was the second generation, with the APIs and there are thousands of people, developing on top of Revit. But these two ideas where you have a product and you give access to the product, it was not necessarily designed as platform. What Forge is, it was really thought platform first. The best way to think about it is like Lego blocks. There are Lego blocks for, viewing data, Lego blocks for accessing data, for searching. So it's a bunch of blocks that we created, and then anybody, so Autodesk for sure, but also any third party, even our competitors can use Forge and take these Lego blocks to build, a car, to build a building, to build a house, or anything you could build with Legos, which are really, any kinds of products. So in substance, Forge, it's a development environment for anybody, customers, partners, competitors, and Autodesk, of course. And the goal as we move forward, and we are not there yet, but, it's going to take a little while, is that, to your point, all the data that's created by Autodesk software, but others, would have one place to live, to stay, but also to connect with other systems, right? Because we cannot pretend that we will own the data for all of the systems, but we need to be able to connect to other systems like maybe Esri, but also, our colleagues at, Trimble or, Bentley. The goal is that the data can connect. And for us, Forge, it's that layer of technology that will enable anything to connect together. And then on top, there are, different solutions that we may talk about that will access the data based on your specific needs. Because if you're an architect or an operator, your needs are different. But that's the place where you get access to everything.
One of the things that I've noticed over the years is that there is an inherent tension between software vendors and standards developers. We've talked to a number of standards-focused folks in this series, folks that are building the next versions of the IFC BIM standards, for instance, or CityGML or whatever. And it always seems to me that the software industry wants to go faster, and the standards groups want to be much more deliberate and inclusive. Can you describe maybe the strengths of both perspectives and how they complement each other in the end?
So first, Autodesk is actively participating in multiple industry associations like Building Smart, where we are actually one of the founding members for a long time ago. But also we joined the ODA more recently. We are also part of the founding members of the Digital Twin Consortium. So, and then, multiple other initiatives. So whenever we can, we participate in these standards actively. I think Revit is the only product certified with the latest IFC with all of the disciplines. So there's a lot of investment and we follow what these standards mean. That said, I have 4 daughters, right? 4 teenage daughters. So you can imagine what my life was, with COVID. So imagine I have these 4 daughters, from 15 to 18 years old. Very close. My wife is also an engineer. So, it's about, productivity when we got the kids. But when I ask, 4 people, I get 5 opinions. When I ask my daughters. So, in some of the standards, there's a lot of debate. A lot of people have different opinions, including ourselves. But we tend to follow the consensus. The challenge is sometimes it takes, the cycle of, this organization, and then the cycle of company like Autodesk are not the same. So sometimes we go faster in terms of developing, all the data that we put in our software. Sometimes we acquire companies, so we have a lot more to offer, and the standards come after. So I think it's when the standards move, we keep adding whatever needs to be in the standard, but we also need to move at our own pace. So in some ways, the IFC, for instance, if we take that example, becomes more the common denominator among all of the software vendors. But there's always an incremental layer. So I think I see, so for instance, Tekla, from Trimble, which is software around structural, my passion originally. There's a hybrid mode, if you will, for data to go between Tekla and Revit, for instance. There is the IFC, but, if I reuse your word, complement, there are also some direct integration for some of the difference, the gaps between what's in IFC and what's maybe in Revit. So I think we live in this hybrid world. It also depends on what you are trying to achieve with IFC. There are different workflows. Sometimes it's contextual data for, the next stakeholder in a project, and maybe it's just about getting that information, but sometimes it's not enough. Or sometimes IFC has more than Revit, sometimes less, for instance. So I think we live in an hybrid world where IFC catches up, but sometimes we may go faster. But our intent is really to solve our customers' needs, for sure.
I love the analogy of your 4 daughters having 5 opinions. I think that so clearly describes the life of the standards organizations. Your observations of how standards and the delta above the standards and the need to interoperate occasionally at the native format level is important. We interviewed Dale Lutz of Safe Software in this series, and I think their company offers great opportunities to move and transform data between standardized formats for sure, but also between native formats to extend the palette that's available to customers. I'd like to shift the conversation just a little bit and away from design and construction and towards operations just a little bit. Many of our customers are responsible for operating large collections of buildings and infrastructures. They're owners of campuses or government installations. And one of the struggles that they have is to try to harvest information from these very rich and detailed data sources built to support the workflows of design and construction, and pull those down into structures and formats that are more appropriate for day-to-day operations. And that's always a real difficulty. I'm sure that you all have been thinking about this a lot as well. How do you envision Autodesk's role looking forward as helping the owner to use this rich information source to actually manage and operate their buildings and infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a pretty meaty topic, but thank you for asking. So, when we introduced BIM to the market, it was really focusing on architects, and then I spoke about engineering, moved into construction, and the next frontier, for sure, it's to be able to enable BIM for owners operators, because today, the cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership for an owner is largely into that phase. and technology can also introduce new processes, improve productivity, communication, and there's a lot of value into doing that. The problem is that, to your point, I don't think the technology is ready yet. So first, it's great that construction companies, not all of them, but some construction companies, create 3D models. The challenge that we see is, and you cannot blame them, but the reason why construction companies create 3D models, it's for their own purpose, right? It's to be, to reduce risk, to manage time, and manage uncertainty on the job site. So the models that are created are for, clash detection, logistics planning, quantity takeoff, and or drive fabrication for, precast or steel or MEP systems. But it's not to help the owner downstream. So they create all of these models that are very sophisticated for their own purpose, for GCs and subs, but it is not for owners operators. But sometimes in the contract, whether it's a public or private project, it says, oh, you need to deliver, a BIM model, and then that's it. And then they would give, a DVD, a USB key, with all of this, and you're like, crap, what do I do with that, right? And it's, I've seen it, it's impossible to do much with it. Only the very brave, owners, operators will try to do something with it. Or, each time we saw it, it was very intentional to learn about how the process works. So we worked with a lot of owners, and we decided that before we can even think about BIM being used in operations, we need to make sure we get what owners need at the handover. And it needs to be a digital handover. So for the first time, we started to develop a product called Autodesk Tandem. It's a digital twin platform. And this product was developed for owners, operators in mind. Not that Revit or AutoCAD or BIM 360 cannot be used by owners, and they are being used, Civil 3D. They are being used a lot by owners, but mainly in the capital project phase, but not really post-construction. So we shift our focus, and we said, okay, so what do an owner operator needs? And we created Tandem. So Tandem, it's a solution that will be used by the operators that will, receive the physical asset, and he or she will also receive the digital asset. Of course, the data going in will be produced by architects, engineers, and contractors, but the format, the needs, the requirements, the organization of data will be for what the owner needs. So right now, that's where we are. We launched Autodesk Tandem, and the things we are working on, it's a few things. So connecting with, maintenance, IWMS, type of technology. And we made an investment in this company called Space IQ. It's an aggregate of, multiple companies. So Space IQ, iOffice, Aerbus. I'm sure, you remember Aerbus, SerraView. So we invested in this partnership so we can build, the next chapter after aggregating the data and connecting with these systems. The other thing that we think would be beneficial is around IoT, right? Because IoT gives you a pulse on what's going on in an asset, right? Whether it's a bridge, a building, or whatever. One of the challenges, I'm sure, Stu, around IoT is that you have tens and tens of providers of sensors, and each of them have their own platform, right? And so you want to know what's going on from energy consumption, so you go there. From comfort, and then you go somewhere else. So it's like a lot of these platforms, and it's really hard to understand, what's this sensor? Why the information is different? So where we think BIM can bring value to the industry, it's really by doing a few things. Number one, it's normalizing the visualization of this data. So whether it's a sensor from company X, Y, or Z, you will see the information the same way. say a little bit like Navisworks, right? So Navisworks, was Switzerland for software, right? You could read, Tekla, Bentley, Autodesk, Trimble, Nemetschek, all in one. So it was normalization of visualization. So number one, we want to normalize the visualization. Number two, we live in a 3D world, right? So it's showing this information on a 3D model, tandem. So we can understand where these things are instead of looking at a list of, 22,000 sensors, somewhere in your large hospital. Number three, we want to access data in real time, in this digital twin and, in real time, but also looking at time history. We want to know what happened, like yesterday, last week, last month, and understand, what it is. So that's another part. And then once we use all of this data, we can start building connections between events, if this, then that, type of things, rules. If I see the temperature like this, I understand the room because I'm in context. That's what BIM brings to the table, in context, information, and the system can make decisions, right? Depending on the time. So that's, that's also another part that, I think we can bring BIM to the table in operations around IoT.
That's a pretty compelling vision you just described there. There will be a lot of people that are pretty excited about that vision. I think, certainly tandem is something that bears close watching, it sounds like. Talk a little bit about the challenges you think we face as an industry. I heard an interview you were in recently, and you were describing some of the global challenges in terms of urban migration and those kinds of things. But certainly that's not the only challenge we face. What are the challenges you're most concerned about?
Yeah, so it's actually demand. Demand, is the problem. And let me try to describe what I mean by that. So today we are about 7.5 billion people on the planet, so lots of people. And we are, I think, 52% in cities, which is, or 50, maybe 55 now. It's like 3.5 billion people live in cities. What's predicted is by 2050 will be about 10 billion on the planet and 70% in cities, which means 7 billion. So today we are 3.5. In about 30 years will be 7. So it means we need to double the size of cities. That's just massive, right? Because we built, all of the cities in thousands of years. Now we need to double that in 30 years. So that's one part of the demand. The second part, it's around, sustainability. So, it's very timely, but it's not a new topic. But, we'll have to build better, but retrofit, the existing built environment to get to some net zero targets in many places in the world, right? There was the COP26. You heard about it. So that's going to create even more demand. The third dimension is natural disasters. There are more natural disasters, this year than ever before, more fires, more, tornado, hurricanes. We even got, as you remember, one hurricane in New England, just this year, right? We didn't have that in a long time, but, flooding, fires, storms, and water, right? So water is very unevenly distributed. Some places have too much, some people don't have enough. So all of that, natural disasters, create demand to improve, protect the existing built environment. 90% of major cities are located around the coast and subject to flooding. So, that alone, we need to protect, whether it's New York or New Orleans or big flooding in Germany as well, over the summer. We need to do that. That's demand. And then finally, around COVID, there's a pandemic task force, right now working on codes, just like we have electric codes or structural codes. There will be COVID codes for existing and new. So it's going to create new demand. in the short term to improve, as we exit the pandemic, but also in the future, we'll have to retrofit for circulation, for, air handling systems, etc. So that's demand. So if you look at, urbanization, demographics, if you look at, natural disasters, sustainability and COVID, it's just, job security for all of us for a very, very long time. There will be a lot of demand, and we are not set up today to, to respond. I'm part of the ACEC, which is the Association of, the American Association of Engineering Companies in the US. And I'm part of their research board. And then I was discussing with some CEOs recently, and they said, we have more work today than we've ever had before, and we have no idea how to respond. So the demand will be enormous. These are the forces that, impact, all of the industry today. And technology can help, because we need to drive productivity. We need to produce more with less, do it better. And that's where technology can help, for sure. But that's going to be some of the big challenges for all of us.
Those are pretty sobering numbers that you've shared with us.
Yeah.
I'll give you an opportunity a little later to put a more positive spin on it. But
it's good. It's good. It's work, right? It's
that's right.
And engineers, architects, contractors are smart people, right? They can make a difference, and they will.
Over the past few years, there's been a real change in the relationship between Autodesk and Esri. And in my mind, it's just a real wonderful change. But talk to us a little bit about your perspective on what that change means to those folks that are involved in designing and constructing and operating buildings and infrastructure.
Yeah, I think it's a proof point about our willingness to, to support the industry, because Autodesk had solutions in GIS, and then Esri was building solutions around BIM, and we're like, wait a minute, why don't we work together? It makes more sense. It's going to help the industry. It's going to move the industry forward. It's going to help our customers. So we decided to stop our work around GIS and say, hey, our friends at Esri, it's for you. And they did the same for BIM, right? So that's pretty rare, for companies like Esri and Autodesk to stop something, in favor of a partner. It takes courage, because it's a leap of faith in many ways, right? But we did it. And to your point, I think our customers are delighted about this. So in substance, what does it mean? So the first part was really to use the Esri technology early in the process, around planning. So our clients, could use GIS information, as context as they were planning. And they were trying to do it, but frankly, it was just, really, really complicated for our customers to make that work. So we simplified and streamlined the process where today, any designer could design something in the context of the GIS world. So that was one piece, connecting our desktop solutions. As we move into operations, and asset management, that's the other part. And we just launched, it was announced at the, Esri and Autodesk conferences, user conferences lately, but this product GeoBeam, where we connect, our cloud offerings. So now back to your question about Forge, Forge enables, this workflow where today, if you're managing an asset, a campus, as you mentioned, you want to go deeper and get access to the BIM, data, for context, right? Some of the things you mentioned earlier, leveraging all of the information. So that's possible through the cloud. So, if you're an owner operator, through GeoBeam, you can access, the click down on all of this rich information. So really it's like a sandwich, where you have, Esri on both ends, the bookends, and then BIM is in the middle.
A few minutes ago, we talked a little bit about the challenges facing really the world, but our industry as a component part. Talk to us a little bit about your vision for the future, about how technology really can help us address these challenges. Where are the most exciting advances that you are watching and working on?
Yeah, so for us, the next disruption will be to start using more artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms for the next wave. As we discussed earlier, demand will be just enormous, right? There's a lot of demand, so we need to start automating things. So there will be things like industrialized construction, where we can, automate some of the processes, start building things in components, inside of factories. That's certainly one aspect of it. And we are still researching, trying to understand where we can make a difference in these workflows. But I think one of the most interesting ideas is to use generative design, where we'll be able to start automating designs and some of the tedious processes to explore more options, better options, more sustainable options. Because today we don't have time to do all of these explorations, right? So automating, parts of this process will be quite important. So how do we do it? And that's the key, connecting the dots, right? So, if you want to make a better school or hospital or bridge or road or wastewater treatment plant, you need to understand, or you need to know what good looks like, right? Because if you want to do something good, you need to know what good looks like. And that's why, the post-construction world is so important. That's why, we build Tandem. That's why we partner with a Space IQ. That's why we acquired Innovize, that has digital twin technology for, water distribution network, for water, wastewater, etc. So we start understanding what good looks like. We start understanding, real-time data. It could be performance, energetic performance, but it's also comfort, happiness of occupants, or whatever the case might be. And by capturing this information, we can now use that information back in design, to start automating some of the tasks, right? So it's really closing the loop. You have planning and design very early, then you have construction, and then you have the operations where you capture data. And with this data, you do two things. Number one, you can optimize in the short term, right? The IoT conversation, because you can start understanding what's going on before it was harder. So you can optimize and make that thing better, whatever the asset is. And number two, it's really taking the knowledge here and use it for the next building, for the next school, for the next bridge. And I think that's exciting. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy for many, many reasons. First, there's a change, right? Process change. But we saw that change, when people move from, paper to CAD to BIM to cloud. So, there will be a lot of change, but we have to do it. There will be also a lot of issues with, data privacy, etc. So, because you don't want to share your data, you don't want to share your IP, because somebody, a construction company or an architect will not want to share their data, for sure. So, it's quite fascinating today, because speaking with many customers around the world, we see different points of view. There's a growing minority that say, hey, there's so much value for me to get access to, some knowledge that's anonymized, and then that will improve my life. And I'm ready to give my data as well, right? So, there's a small, growing community of people that think that way. It's not the case for being very honest here. It's not the case for a large majority of people. And it's going to be the case for a long time. But I think slowly but surely we'll go there. Maybe it's going to be people using their own data for their own projects, as a reasonable first step. And then maybe a community of people that give things and get things. And then at some point it's going to be mainstream. But we are a slow moving industry. Think about it, next year, we'll celebrate the 20 years of the introduction of BIM. So in April 2022, it's going to be the 20 years. So we are a slow moving industry. So it's going to take a little while, but I'm very excited about what data can offer to all of us.
Nicolas, our conversation has covered quite a lot of ground here today in different aspects. What questions have I not asked you that I should have? What experiences or perspectives do you have that you'd like to share that I have not asked you about yet?
One of the questions is, why are you not going faster? For instance, so that's a tricky question to answer, because there's so much to do. There's a big vision. Why can't you realize it faster? So I think it's a difficult question, and we always, try to manage it all, right? Because I spoke about the different disruptions, right? CAD, BIM, cloud, and then the next one. But CAD is not going away. AutoCAD is used by, tens of millions of people. BIM is there. You need the cloud. And so we need to help, people and meet people wherever they are in their, technology maturity, journey. So that's why we need to work on the spectrum, for sure. We serve, 4 industries. We serve the building, transportation, water industry also. It's also a lot. And we constantly try to manage, these priorities. But the one thing I'm very optimistic is, you will see Autodesk, and we talked about it at Autodesk University just a couple of months ago. You will see companies like Autodesk and also others, move more to a platform, approach, Forge being the foundation. And as we refactor and work on these platforms, it's going to increase velocity in terms of development, right? So the cloud will enable, a lot of that. And our intent will be to help and inspire our customers to follow us on this journey from maybe vertical products to horizontal platforms. And that, I think that's something you will see a lot more from Autodesk in the years to come.
Well, I certainly look forward to that journey. It will be an exciting process to watch. Nicolas, thank you very much for your willingness to share your experience and your perspective with us today. I've really enjoyed our discussions immensely, and look forward to watching where Autodesk helps to lead the world in the future.
Likewise, and thank you for having me.